battling Magecart, risks of third-party scripts. Very exciting topic. I know that everybody's got a nice full belly and maybe a little bit sleepy. If you want to take a snooze, I got no problem with that. Just don't snore. So this is kind of outline of the talk. I'll tell you who I am, what we're really talking about. We'll talk a little bit more about Magecart, content security policy, which is really the way to prevent these kind of attacks. Some challenges that you'll run into with that, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So my name's Kevin. I'm a recent Columbus transplant. I've been doing InfoSec in Pittsburgh for about 20 years for financial services, retail, all kinds of different companies. I've been in Columbus for about 8 months. Really enjoying it here. Really happy to be speaking at BSides, and so thanks for having me. So I'm a senior InfoSec architect at BSides Columbus. I noticed that there's a lot of retail here in Columbus, and being a retail person myself, I thought this would be a helpful talk for some of the folks in the area. I love mangled packets, SQL injection, long walks on the stack, kind of a mix of red and blue and increasingly orange, getting more involved with the development process and trying to insert security into DevOps, which is a challenge for pretty much everyone, I think. A little bit noisy. I've done some SANS classes, spoke at Cleveland and Pittsburgh BSides, DerbyCon, IC Squared, a couple other groups. So all that noise and horn tooting there is really just to say I've seen some things, okay? And so we'll go through it. So this is really what cybersecurity in retail sporting goods is like. You're just trying to live the brand, be healthy. At the same time, you're fighting invisible bad guys. You're not really sure where they are, but you're doing your best. You're doing your best. So third-party JavaScript integrations. What are they? Who uses them? Why are they used? So it's really about JavaScript that's instructed to load into the user's browser, and it's downloaded from a site other than the one that they originally visited. That's all it is. You probably see it all the time. It can be used for all kinds of different purposes, but when we talk about third-party JavaScript, that's really what I'm going after. It's trusted code. The originating domain has no control over, so the originating domain has decided to trust this integration for whatever reason, and but they ultimately don't have any control over the code. That also means you don't have any ability to put things like a web application firewall in front of it, or a traditional firewall, because the call is going out to a server other than the origin. Oh, and a common term for this is tags. That's something that's come up recently. You'll hear things like tag governance or tag management solution. When you hear somebody in marketing talking about tags, this is what they're talking about. So who uses it? Retail. Anybody else here in retail? All right. A bunch of people. It's good, a few of us. Hospitality. Hospitality is actually a big consumer of this stuff. You can go to some of the big hotel booking sites or airline booking sites and those kind of things, and you might find 100, 150 different tags integrations like this. They're very interested in tracking what you're doing, and maybe they're trying to see if you're visiting other hotel booking sites or those kind of things. So they're very heavy users in hospitality. Entertainment as well, and we'll talk about one of the companies that got breached this way. They were a pretty big entertainment company, airlines, British Airlines. But really, any site can do this. You don't have to necessarily even be using a JavaScript tag for the purposes of tracking or monitoring to go get third-party JavaScript. You could, you might have somebody that just points out to a GitHub repository because there's a particular JavaScript there that they want to use, and they don't want to necessarily host it on the server. So why are people doing this? Number one is probably marketing. So in marketing for, for various reasons, social media sites, those kind of things. Customer service and customer experience is another big one. So you ever go to a website and you get that little chat box down at the bottom, hey, how's your experience going? Let's talk about it. It's a chat bot, it's a JavaScript integration. There's also a customer experience type of integration where the JavaScript loads up and it tracks where the user's cursor is going and where they hover and boxes that they type into, all that kind of stuff to try to figure out if they are having a good experience, where their time is focused, all things that would be very interesting to customer experience team back at the branch. And we have that as well. We definitely have an integration like this on our own site. I mentioned social media. So Facebook is very interested in what you're doing. Facebook can give data back to users of JavaScript tags on what the customer is doing, where their time is focused, who that person is, for the purposes of pushing ads on Facebook, or on Snapchat, or on Instagram. And each individual one of these social media companies has their own tag. So that's another library that you're trusting from a third party, another integration that you have to track and worry about. And another thing that's completely out of your control, again, is all handled on somebody else's server. Tracking, which is just kind of laid that out, and lazy dev. Some developer that's doesn't necessarily want to host their own script, like I mentioned. They just go right out to a GitHub repository or something like that, and now you're loading up from a GitHub repo. What could go wrong, right? What could go wrong by pointing directly at somebody else's GitHub, except that maybe somebody does a pull request and it inserts some malicious code, and now all your customers are affected. But everybody that does this stuff, whenever they're initially standing it up, they're like giving themselves a high five. They think they're doing a really great thing. We're going to help with marketing. We're going to help with tracking. We're going to get all kinds of conversion. This is all a good thing, and they're just super proud of themselves. They just don't really think about the risks that exist when you do this. So let's talk about Magecart. Who here has heard about Magecart? All right. So it's ultimately a loose term. There are a number of different groups that comprise Magecart. They all have kind of different tactics and techniques, but their goals are ultimately the same. They want to own the user's browser for their own purposes, and usually the purposes are, they want to steal data. And a big hat tip to RiskIQ for their work here, because they're really the ones that blew the lid off of Magecart, figured out who the different threat actors were, and their different techniques and that kind of stuff. So what are they after? It started out with credit card data. So what they were doing was inserting a JavaScript skimmer, essentially, into the payment page, checkout page of a particular site, and just grabbing all of that cardholder data as it's being typed in by the user. So, you can do all the encryption you want as you post back to the server. This script was actually just grabbing it as it was being typed and having it sent off to the bad guys. More recently, we've seen them go after PII, login credentials. So anything that the attackers might find useful, they can grab directly from the user's browser using this methodology. And anything else submitted via a form, I would be worried if I was in healthcare. I think that might be a good next place for these guys to go, just because PHI records are very useful and worth a lot of money to the bad guy. So let's talk about how they did it. In one case, they compromised the third party that's hosting the third-party JavaScript. In other cases, they just compromise a vulnerable website and insert their malicious code into the website directly. And in either way, they're just trying to send data to a domain that they control. Any questions on that? I'm kind of moving real fast. I'm sorry. Okay. So who's been affected? entertainment company, Ticketmaster. They were one of the first. These guys were compromised. They actually weren't compromised at all. Ticketmaster was not compromised. One of their partners was. And that partner, it was one of these, customer support, customer experience type of integrations. That company was compromised. And then as the users went to Ticketmaster's site, they loaded up this third-party JavaScript. Ticketmaster had no idea it was malicious or that there was anything to worry about. And then all of a sudden, a few months later, they're the ones in the headlines of having a giant breach. Ticketmaster itself didn't have the breach, that's the thing. But it's their name, and it was their users, and their users' data that went out the door, unfortunately. British Airways was another one. It was like something like 700,000 user records, something along those lines, credit card information that was stolen in that breach. In that case, the attackers were able to compromise British Airways. And so the script was not from a third party, it was from JavaScript that was impacted on British Airways' own site. And unfortunately, it caused a big mess. So as RiskIQ started digging into it, it was like, first it was looking like 8,000, 10,000 e-com deployments that may have been affected. And then all of a sudden, like 2 weeks later, it was 20,000 plus. And all they can really do is go by who these third parties had integrations with. Some of these customer experience companies, they have 10,000 customers using the same JavaScript. And there's really no way for the originating company, the origin host, to know if one of their customers was served a malicious JavaScript. So there hasn't been a ton of information about all of the folks who were actually impacted, all of the sites that were actually compromised in this way. But we can get an idea, and it looks, to be in the tens of thousands of sites, which is really crazy. And there are other types of attacks that are not Magecart related, but are related to JavaScript. So one is crypto mining, and I should have called that cryptocurrency mining, because it's irritating to me that crypto is now currency and not cryptography, but I'll digress. So crypto miners can be inserted with JavaScript. And there's been a few examples of this where a company in the UK began serving up third-party JavaScript that had a crypto miner built in to their JavaScript. So the bad guys had broken into the third party, inserted the crypto miner, and then anytime someone visited the page, all of a sudden their browser is making some Monero for them. And the originating host had no idea. Adware is another one. So if you have a PC that's compromised with some adware, in a lot of cases, the adware will just sit there and watch for pages to come up that say things like checkout, and then they'll insert JavaScript into that page. Person clicks checkout, and all of a sudden they're getting a pop-up and a redirect. And where am I going? Oh, here's that same product at another vendor. That's cool. So not great if you're an e-commerce person and you're trying to sell your product. If, you have a client that's been compromised with adware, and all of a sudden they're being redirected all over the place. And clickjacking. So there are ways already to prevent clickjacking, but CSP is another way to do that. There are certain directives that you can issue that say, okay, here's where frames are allowed from, and here's where they aren't. So this is not fine. There's nothing good about this, but we can start talking about some solutions. So content security policies. Anybody know what that is? Anybody heard of it before? Yeah. Okay. So ultimately, it's just an HTTP header from the server that informs the browser, hey, here's the domains that you're allowed to talk to. Here's the domains you should expect scripts from. The domains you should expect frames from. And that's really all it is. This is the best CSP you could have, which you're just basically saying, no, I only allow JavaScripts from myself, from the origin host. Now, unfortunately, everything we just talked about here, we're not, third-party JavaScript is not going to be allowed in this case. So something that might look a little more realistic is something like this, where you're saying, okay, well, I'm allowed JavaScript from myself, I'll allow it from any Google domain, and then maybe I have a trusted partner. And so in this case, you're locking all communication down just to these domains. And so if a bad guy is able to insert a script that says, hey, send it off to my domain, that domain isn't going to be defined here. The browser's going to say, I don't think so, and ripping off those credit card numbers or that information just isn't going to work. And this is the one for clickjacking where you're defining domains for particular frames. The frame ancestors directive is part of CSP 2.0, so it's relatively new. It's like 4 years old. You'll see that CSP and different versions of CSP are only supported by certain browser versions. So that's something that has to be taken into consideration. This is, you're not going to protect every single customer. Somebody comes to your website running XP and Internet Explorer 4. They're SOL for a number of reasons, not just that they're not protected with CSP. So SRI is a part of CSP as well. And what it stands for is sub-resource integrity. So this gives you a way not only to control the domains that can communicate back and forth with the browser, but also to give you some idea of the integrity of the JavaScript itself to see if it's been tampered with. And here's how it works. So the server sends along the JavaScript with a hash value, SHA-256 hash, something like that. When the client receives it, it takes a look at the JavaScript it received, runs the same hashing calculation, compares the hash sent from the server to the one that was calculated on the client, and if they match, the script executes. If they don't match, the script doesn't execute. Very simple, but very effective, because now if anything along the way, so if there was JavaScript that was sent over HTTP, and someone in between there decided to insert their own ads or their own additional JavaScript along the way, it's actually not going to execute. And we've seen that before as well. Script being inserted over HTTP connections. So these are the what it looks like when you actually have to turn on SRI. So you have to require SRI 4, and you would say script. So have this calculation happen for any script that's being served up. And then when you reference the script in the HTML, you can see that there's this integrity equal, and then there's some SHA-256 value, SHA-384 value, whatever you want to set it to. Now this is only going to work for scripts that are relatively static. If you have a partner that's changing these JavaScripts every 2 or 3 days, that means that hash value is going to change, and you're going to have some way to constantly update it with the latest hash value. But it is a very effective way to prevent JavaScript from being tampered with, or to prevent JavaScript that's been tampered with from executing. And so the bad guys are super sad because data that they've been able to successfully scrape, even if they did scrape it, it's not going to get sent back to them because CSP says no, you're not allowed to talk to the domain that the attacker controls. Scripts won't execute if you have SRI involved, because you're checking integrity, you're making sure that that script is the original script. Clicks won't be jacked, cryptos won't be mined, redirects won't be redirected. That's the short version. So this is kind of the evolution of CSP in your environment. If you have no CSP, you kind of not even really got a human-sized brain. CSP, you've evolved. You're now like a human being. You're doing the right thing. CSP plus SRI is, yes, you're enlightened. And eliminating all JavaScript is galaxy brain, but I don't think anybody's going to be able to do that, unfortunately. It'd be great, though, for our security. So where do you put CSP? You can do it in the application itself. That's probably not the right place. You probably want to have it like in the web server, being served up from the web server itself. For every page, you just insert that header. Now, when it comes to the Magecart situation, it's actually more important for you to protect certain kinds of pages. So you don't have to protect every single page, especially if there isn't a form on it. So you might be more concerned about just checkout, or checkout and user registration, or checkout, user registration, and login. Those are probably the most important places to have something there, because that's the data that they want to scrape. They don't really care about, the form that says, "Oh, I want to buy 2 pairs of those shoes." You don't need to protect that form as much. You can also configure it in a load balancer or a proxy, reverse proxy, something like an F5 load balancer that allows you to insert headers into any request coming along. But the main thing is really about keeping the policy updated, and the best place to put it is based on how you're going to keep the policy updated. Content delivery network can do this, something like an Akamai or Cloudflare or whatever. Anything that can insert an HTTP header is really where you can place this. Any questions up to now?
Yes.
I'm here.
CSP, does that only protect against JavaScript?
No, it's any scripting language.
Any scripting language?
Yeah.
What about CSS?
CSS you can also protect. So they say that directive is style. So you could say like require SRI for style, and then you'll do the same hashing calculation for CSS.
Because I'd imagine the very next thing the bad guys would do would be trying to put a style on input type of any type, and then passing background URL to whatever IP address they own.
Yeah.
Some query, and then check the logs for keystrokes.
Yeah.
So as long as we can fight that, I think we're in good shape.
Yeah. You can definitely define style. You can do things like you can define like a mixed content type situation where you have some stuff being served over HTTP, some stuff being served over HTTPS. You could actually define what type of content can be served over unencrypted protocols, and which domains it can come from. So you can get very, very specific and ratchet it down, in those kind of cases. So probably the biggest challenge with this thing is the maintenance of it. Marketing teams want to move very fast. They're trying to capture eyeballs and dollars ultimately. So they're constantly changing these tags, constantly reworking, adding new ones, that sort of thing. So anytime they do that, and there's some new tag of the day that comes along, or Facebook changes their tag to something else or whatever, now you have to go modify your CSP, and that's not necessarily an easy thing. If you can do it in one place, if you do it in a single place, like a load balancer, for example, that's very helpful. But if you have to go touch, all sorts of different pieces of the application to adjust for this, that's when it's going to get pretty painful. So really, if you can serve the CSP up from a location that's central, that's a single place, a choke point for all the traffic or whatever, that's going to be immensely helpful for keeping up with the maintenance. Another issue is tag piggybacking. So you have some of these tag providers that are in the business of doing this for you. And so you might define their domain as okie dokie, but then they go and call out to 10 other domains for you that they never told you they were going to do that. Or in the case of ads, there might be a bidding war going on for which ads are going to be served up, and then you get called out to a number of other domains that are serving up JavaScript in those cases. So you really have to work with your tag providers to understand, are you doing piggybacking? Are you going to have third party, fourth party, and so on and so forth with additional tags on the site, because that's going to blow up your CSP, and that's not going to help. Browser support, I mentioned this earlier. IE 11, they do nothing. They do nothing with CSP. So, again, you're trying to protect your users, but it really is up to them to come with a correct and decent web browser, which IE is not. And you have to tread carefully, because you can break things. if you just crank up a CSP and don't do a lot of digging, don't do a lot of investigating into what's actually going on there, you can blow up the entire site. So be very careful. With regards to support, yeah, that's pretty clear. So here's the browser support situation. So there are really 4 versions of CSP, even though they say that, oh, well, there's version 1.0 and version 2.0. No, not really. There's actually 4. There's X-WebKit CSP, which worked on older versions of Chrome and older versions of Safari. And then you have the X Content Security Policy header, which worked on, a little bit on Internet Explorer, a little bit on Edge. As you see, IE, that's really the only header that's going to work when it comes to Internet Explorer. But it's deprecated. They say, okay, there really should not be support for this anymore. So if you start serving up Content Security Policy, which is the new one for version 1.0 and 2.0, and you're also serving up X Content Security Policy, you can blow things up there. So it's like, okay, how much work do we want to do to protect users who are using all these different browsers? Because what you could do is say, okay, users visited my site, are they using IE11? If so, send them X Content Security Policy. If they're using Chrome, send them the real Content Security Policy. So it gets a little, a little tough and trying to work out logic there. So, some good tools. Google has a great content security policy evaluator. And it'll just tell you, give you an idea of, okay, here's where you're at right now. And it will call out in bright red, hey, this looks bad, you need to fix this. Or, you're missing directives for this, that, and the other thing, and could be a little better. There's a site called CSP is Awesome, which will help you build a very tight content security policy on the fly, and then you can just copy and paste it into your application. It's not going to know about every possible tag that's out there, so I certainly wouldn't use that as your starting point. You just throw one together and pop it on your site, because, like I said, if you have one of these tag providers that's doing piggybacking and that sort of thing, there's no way this tool is going to know about that. Report URI is another similar tool that lets you evaluate and modify and adjust CSP. And then this guy, Scott Helm, he's done a lot of work in this space. He has a lot of documentation on his blog about it. So I suggest that you take a look at his stuff. And I put links to a bunch of these things if you go to this TinyCC. I have links out to all these sites and a couple other ones. And that can hopefully help you out if this is an issue. And like I said, I went really fast, so we're already at the questions. Does anybody have anything they want to bring up? Yes?
So for SRI, is there something that that prevents an attacker who hasn't been in the middle position to modify the scripts from just modifying the hash?
Yes, but they would have to have the original script, then calculate the hash, which I mean is certainly possible. Yeah. They could do. Yeah, so it's not 100% protection for sure, but it at least makes it a little trickier for them. So they'd have to recognize that integrity was there, and then be calculating the hash, and providing both the hash of their new thing to the other side.
How do you audit this?
How do you audit a CSP?
How do you do it? Or how does Dick's audit that you guys are doing this?
So it's a challenge for us, and that's really how this talk came up. We started hearing about Magecart, and it was like, that's interesting. What's that? Oh, what's a CSP? And so now we are in very deep discussions with a number of groups. Marketing is one of them for sure. I would say in our environment, they probably own 90% of this stuff. The other groups are the customer experience folks, loss prevention is interested a little bit because they have a tag of their own for fraud purposes and that kind of stuff. And we even started exploring some commercial products. None of them are fully baked yet. This is a new problem for everyone, for sure. And so there are some, some products on the market. I'm not here to pitch anybody's product, but if you want to talk about them offline, we can. But it's a very new problem for everyone. So I think everybody's in that situation where it's like, okay, how do we really go after this?
Yeah, so like owning it, like, I mean, the problem I see is like who owns it, like is that you're gonna have a developer roll it into a Docker container.
It's going to have to be a developer ultimately that's making sure that this gets
that's
deployed.
right. That's how I see it. Yeah.
But it's that tight integration between the developer and marketing, which is not traditional. Marketing just wants to go and do things on the fly and add new tags and all that, and it's just not. That's not going to be the way forward if we're going to really stay on top of this without breaking stuff. There's also been a lot of head scratching around: do we need this many tags? Do we truly need? What is the value of each of these? And it started those kind of discussions as well, because all of a sudden, there's going to be a heavy cost to IT to maintain these kind of things, and does that cost, bumped up against the money we're actually making from having these things in place? Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a lot of discussion right now within our org, and I think the threat is big enough for everybody to say, okay, we must figure this out. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, and maybe a PCI expert might be able to tell me better, but I wouldn't be surprised if this started to come into play for PCI guidance, because so many credit cards were taken in this way, and nobody really thought about it. Like, nobody thought about this as a potential vector.
Don't forget about GDPR. PI.
There you go. Yeah.
IP addresses.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see. It should be interesting. Sure.
So on the CSP side, obviously that's for the organization themselves to help bake stuff in to protect. What do you see as kind of some of the expectation for the tagging companies themselves? Is it just general security posture stuff to make sure that they're developing scripting in such a secure way to not lead to compromise? How do you hold those guys accountable, like contractually or otherwise, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, well, you have them go through your risk assessment, like typical situation, and if they end up being the source of your problem, then you could go back to them for liability or whatever. But the problem is, in the Ticketmaster situation, it was not them that got popped, but it was their brand that was damaged.
Do we know who it was that did pop?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
We don't even know who they are. Just some company ruined, basically, or stained their entire brand.
For that little chat.
Yeah.
For that little, hey, you look like you need help with something. Like Clippy. It's basically Clippy for customer service. So. Anything else?
Actually, I have a question.
Sure.
And maybe this is more theoretical, but how would you do drift detection to see how the CSP has changed over time, and maybe do unit testing against that?
That's interesting. So you could probably do that with by testing through a reverse proxy that was just made for that purpose. So you could see, okay, well, here's my my policy at this time, and then rotate it. You can even automate that rotation pretty easily, and just say, okay, we'll just test through it was as it was originally, and every iteration up until now. Because that proxy, you can just do the same thing. I mean, you could stand up a CSP locally on your machine, using a proxy like Burp or something like that, and just see what kind of effect it would have on the site, if you wanted to do it that way too.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good. Thank you.
console give you a way to see SRI layers?
Yeah, because it does, just because if you go to the network tab in Chrome, reload the page, and then you'll go, just limit it to the domain that you're interested in. It'll just be one of the headers that comes across, just like a cookie or anything else. It'll just be in there as one of the headers. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we made it. If you want to contact me, there's my information out there. Please reach out. And I like talking this stuff. And this is also new to everyone. I think at this point that I think we can help each other in this area. So give you a little time back too.